This is the first in a series of programs under the title Unbinding Our Stories. What we're about to hear from Sister Josée Ngalula will stay with us for a very long time. Her testimony is, I promise you, not to be missed. But first we meet Bryan Massingdale, a priest, an academic, and an activist. In his experience, black male victims of clerical abuse don't feel able to own the title of survivor. They see themselves merely as copers.
I think one of the ways to get at this is to tell a story, and it comes from the Milwaukee area. In the 1990s, there was a priest in Milwaukee's Central City that was basically abusing Black young boys by showing them, and I quote from the diocese's own website, showing them dirty movies, nasty movies, and then having sex with them. And this was a letter of complaint that came in from a Black parishioner. And her words were, she wanted to tell the story because, and I quote, she didn't want the inner city to be missed or forgotten, close quote. And I think that's how racism has affected communities of color in general, but especially African-American communities. We're invisible. We are invisible. When we look and when we think of the image of the typical, clergy victim survivor, we think of someone who is white, often male. The literature has white faces. The leadership of the organizations are basically white. And what that communicates is that there's no room for the trauma that victims of color of clergy sexual abuse have experienced. This is on top of the historic lack of sensitivity that the Catholic Church has shown to Black Catholics around the country in terms of the closure of our parishes, the mergers of our schools, the abandonment of our communities. And often these plans have taken place without any real meaningful consultation with the Black Catholic community. And so I think all of those are ways. And I think another way in which racism plays a role is that some of the terminology that we use for the community doesn't necessarily resonate with African Americans. So for example, we usually use the term victim survivor. But when I talk to members, Black men in particular, who have been abused by priests, one of them said to me, I don't feel like I'm surviving anything. I'm just coping. I do what I do because I have to cope. And so I've often said that when I'm talking about the Black Catholic community, I use the word coper because I think it means that that's a more culturally resonant term, at least among some Black Catholic men who have been victimized. So I think in all of those ways, the terminology, the faces, the literature, the leadership, and simply the general feeling that our pain is invisible. I think these are the ways in which racism initially affects Black Catholics in particular. Most victim survivors have reported that when they make their report, they don't feel believed, they don't feel credible. And I think that that's a common experience. But I also think that there are unique ways in which, I'll speak specifically from the Black experience, that it manifests itself. First is that if you are perceived as not being able to speak standard white English, then your testimony is seen as uncredible by white listeners. So the inability to speak standard, unaccented Midwestern English is automatic. If you sound Black, to put it bluntly, then you're not going to be seen as credible. If you come across as too angry, then again, you're the angry Black man or the angry Black woman, and your testimony is seen as uncredible. Another barrier is that many of those who are charged with being the point of contact in many dioceses and religious orders Many of them lack the cultural competence to listen and to be present to Black people or others of color. One of the things I've heard across in my research is that some victim assistance coordinators are unaware or unfamiliar with inner city neighborhoods. They don't know how to speak with Black men, and also, to be honest, Black people find it very hard to be vulnerable and to talk about the intimate violation of their body to someone who may look like the person who did this harm to them. Another thing we need to talk about is how bodies of color are sexually coded or understood in our society. Especially Black women are seen as being loose and promiscuous. Black men as being sexually rapacious and irresponsible. Therefore, there's a kind of presumption that in many cases, the victim did something to bring this on. And so I think these are another barrier that we find, especially among Black communities, is that there's a fear of bringing forth your testimony, especially to law enforcement, when doing so may call attention to your own vulnerability or precarity with law enforcement. There's a long history of a distrust of the law enforcement community in the Black community for many reasons, going back generations. And so there's a real hesitancy to do that, especially if by doing so, I may call attention to the fact that I may have a parole violation or something like this. I think all of these are ways that really affect our barriers, that are real problems, real obstacles for Black communities to be heard and to bring forth their testimony. I think just the general fact of who's going to believe me. As one person told me in my research, they don't even believe white victims. Why are they going to believe me? And especially if I'm going to go against a white priest who has a graduate education, who knows the system, and in many cases, I don't. I think these are all barriers that people of color experience and have experienced when it comes to bringing forth their stories to be heard in the faith community. An important point, I think, is really relevant in the African American community, and that is the shame that surrounds especially same-sex violation, and how that can be coded as, anti-LGBTQ prejudice. But I want to highlight something particularly dynamic, and that is the difficulty that Black men may experience in reporting being sexually violated, especially by a white man. I mean, I think this is a very sensitive topic, but we need to talk about it because it's very relevant to this issue, that for a Black man to have to admit publicly that he has lost control of his own sexual body and that happened by a white man, I think really I can't imagine too many Black men who would want to admit to that publicly, and then to have to admit that happened to another white person. That can be even more traumatic, because I think we need to look at the fact in which how race has been used as a power means to basically subjugate people and to let them know that you're not in charge, you're not in control. And I think that's a dynamic that we don't know how to talk about in our culture. We don't know how to talk about how the bodies of people of color are sexually coded, the sexual stereotypes that attend Black men, Latino women, Black women, Native peoples. And I think that's another, layer of complication, that it's an obstacle to people, feeling free to share their stories of a trauma and violation, especially in church settings. Let's start with the positive, and that's usually not where I usually start. So it's just, but I'm trying to be as optimistic as I can be. Let's start with the positive, and that is, we're only now beginning to talk about this issue. Up until last spring, with the Taking Responsibility Initiative out of Fordham University, that was the first time that we had a series of encounters and a series of sessions devoted to the impact of clergy sexual abuse upon Native, Latine, Black, and Asian communities. So we're really, coming up on maybe the 15-month mark. And so really what we're doing tonight with Awake is a major step in the process. And you're saying, well, that's a pretty low bar. Well, that shows you how it shows you where we were. So we're still really in the infancy. So we need to continue doing things like this. Now, having said that, I think we also have to be honest and realize that every step that the Catholic Church has made on these issues has come not because the Catholic Church's leadership has voluntarily chose to do so. In other words, we are where we are because of the efforts of victim survivor COPER communities putting pressure, bringing legal pressure, court-ordered pressure. The reason why we have access to archdiocese files is because of court settlements. So I think going forward, what we need to do for communities of color is that in future court settlements, we need to require that dioceses and religious orders hire culturally competent and sensitive personnel who can work with communities of color, or if they can't hire them, then they have to be able to outsource this and bring in people who are culturally competent to deal with this. I think another thing we need to do is that we need to mandate through court-ordered settlements that dioceses and religious orders engage in the kind of research and truth and uncover the identities, the racial and ethnic identities of those who have been harmed and violated. I think we also need to require in future settlements that systems of religious seminary formation deal with the power dynamics that are racially and ethnically based. It's not enough to simply talk about everyone going through, safe environment training. I mean, yeah, that's the low-hanging fruit. But now I think we need to talk about, okay, how does race and ethnicity intersect with power and sexuality, and say that you cannot be ordained and you cannot exercise ministerial leadership in the Catholic Church without having seriously engaged that as part of your preparation for ministry. I think these are the things that need to be done, but I also think we need to be honest and realize that our history up until now has shown that the religious leadership will not do this voluntarily. They do this because they are forced to.
One is broken, the body suffers. Let's pray for healing for one another. When one is broken, the body suffers. Let's pray for healing for one another. Let's pray.
And now, in a unique personal statement from Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, theologian Sister Josée Ngalula shares with us the results of her survey of nearly 3,000 female religious and lay women, which she conducted personally over the space of 20 years, from 2002 to 2022. Look, the quality of the recording isn't great, but her findings are truly shocking, and they're profoundly important.
Hello, everybody. I am Josée Ngalula. I am a sister of St. Andrew. I live in Kinshasa. I am from DRC. I am a theologian. The testimony I'm giving is a summary of a survey I have done here in DRC, listening to survivors of sexual abuse in African context. So I share with you the main points they have stressed in the testimony, and they want people to hear and to know. The first thing they want us to know is that in African context, the perpetrators of sexual abuse are both men and women. So firstly, I take the men. The men who are perpetrators in religious institutions can be the clerics, they can be the consecrated men without ordinations, usually called brothers, and they can be also the laity. Concerning the clerics, abuse mainly comes from in the context of abuse of authority. I mean that chaplains in the convents, spiritual accompanists, or visitors who are clerics usually use misinterpretations of Bible verses to make the nuns and other women who are very attached to piety, to convince them that they are wives of Christ with Bible verses, and that if you are a wife of Christ, you must give both your soul and body to the Christ. That is the first step. The second step, that from this misinterpretation, they convince them that the cleric represents the Christ. And because the clerics represent the Christ, you have to give to these clerics, your soul and your body. So this opened to the sexual abuse from these misinterpretations of Bible verse. A second Bible verse that is used to in the context of spiritual abuse is about the love. In the first letter of Corinthians, it is said that the love endures all, and the love forgives everything. So once this verse is inoculated in the mind of the victims, so they force the spiritual minds to conclude that they don't have to complain about sexual abuse. They have to forgive sexual abuse, so they don't have to denounce the sexual abuse. So that is the first, the more thing, the spiritual abuse from the misinterpretation of Bible verse that are inoculated in the minds of the victims. The second thing that is stressed by the survivors is that there is also traps. We have nuns and other women who are trapped through invitation to isolated place for spiritual exercise, for example, for confession or for spiritual dialogue, women are trapped by clerics in isolated place, and they are raped either through physical force or either through threats or blackmail. Blackmail comes mainly from the confession. When a woman, a married woman or a nun goes to confession and says that she had made a sin, for example, abortion or adultery, after that the clerics takes this information and begin to make a blackmail in the woman to force her to sexual intercourse, otherwise he will denounce her. So we have traps through blackmail. So from a spiritual exercise, we have also traps from affection, in the context of relationships of friendship. In the relationship of friendship, we have men clerics who put in the women religious or a woman with very strong piety to say to them that the Bible says that love must be concretized, love must go until to the end. Also, they use rumors in the cultures that says that virginity causes disease. And in this context, they manipulate the mind of the victims to force them to accept the rape, not as a rape, but as a manifestation of a love. So there's about the clerics. The perpetrators are also the laity. First in the context of medical consultation, we have doctors who rape women in the context of gynecological consultations. They are forced in this consultation. We have also laity who are in position of power. It can be politicians, it can be military, it can be politician, it can be rich men who kidnap women, nuns or other women, in the context of the parishes, in the context of Christian activities. They go there as good parishioners, are good Catholics, and in this context, they kidnap men and trap them in houses and rape them. The laity are also in the context of studies. We have students who are in the position of pressures from the professors or academic men who have academic power, who force them to sexual intercourse before giving exam points or report cards. So that is the from men. We have also from women, especially by the nuns in position of authority in religious life. Nun who is superior, nun who is trainer. They make rape, homosexual rape, in the context of abuse of authority, threatening postulants or novitiates that if you refuse I will give a bad report and you will not be admitted for the vows. So it's a blackmail. So that was, I wanted to say to you, thank you for have listening to me.